Good evening, I'm Claudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a 3-day ceasefire next month to mark the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II in Europe. Having consistently broken its promises and targeting Ukrainian civilians, is Moscow to be believed? More on that in just a moment, but first let's take a look at the latest headlines. North Korea officially admits deployment of troops to fight in Russia's war against Ukraine. Albania and Montenegro to join the Three Seas initiative as the meetings take place in the Polish capital. Polish president endorses conservative presidential hopeful Karol Nawrocki as election day nears. As Vladimir Putin announced a 72-hour ceasefire on Russia's Victory Day, citing humanitarian considerations, a tangible ceasefire seems to still be out of reach. Moscow is hell-bent on securing occupied Ukrainian lands, including Crimea, as Washington is not exerting enough pressure to counter the Kremlin's demand. Joining me now is our Ukraine correspondent, Oz Chatterjee. Good evening, Oz. So this recent announcement by Vladimir Putin, is this yet another smokescreen for Russia, or are we to see something change?
Well, the Ukrainians certainly believe it's a smokescreen. The Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Andrei Sybiha, hit back rather immediately with a question for the Kremlin. Let's take a look at that statement.
If Russia truly wants peace, it must cease fire immediately. Why wait until May the 8th? If the fire can be ceased now and since any date for 30 days, so it is real, not just for a parade. Ukraine is ready to support a lasting, durable and full ceasefire, and this is what we are constantly proposing for at least 30 days.
So the Ukrainian position there is still that they want this 30-day ceasefire, which Russia has continually rejected. Now, it must also be said that the unilateral Easter Sunday ceasefire, so-called ceasefire called by Vladimir Putin, the Ukrainians reported that the Russians violated it more than 2,000 times. So there is very little confidence here in Kyiv that this ceasefire is anything different to the one we saw just a few days ago, which Russia did not respect. Now, the White House has responded. The National Security Council spokesperson Brian Hughes said Trump welcomed the news from Putin, but he wanted to, and the White House's position is they want to move Russia and Ukraine to a permanent ceasefire. Now, we've heard some new lines from Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, which make those positions very, very, very clear, the Russian positions, which go against what even the US's major concessions have been asking for. Now, Steve Witkoff, the US Special Envoy to the Middle East, who's been leading negotiations with Russia, has put forward proposals which Ukraine has already rejected, but those proposals included official US recognition of Crimea as being Russian and de facto recognition of those 4 other territories that Russia has illegally tried to annex. Now, the Lavrov's position says that it goes much further. They want full international recognition, not just of Crimea, but of all of the territories that they currently control, plus the rest of the territory they haven't managed to conquer in those particular regions yet. It also stresses they want to see Ukraine demilitarized. They also want all of the sanctions lifted from 2014 onwards against Russia when they first invaded and annexed Crimea. So these are incredibly maximalist positions, basically the same positions they had before the war. Macron, the British government at the time, the Biden administration, all of these world leaders tried to talk to Putin about these issues and say, please don't invade, let's talk about these issues. Russia's position is the same as it was before the war. So if the Trump administration is hoping that Steve Witkoff's proposals are going to be accepted by the Kremlin, well, Sergei Lavrov has just rejected them and restated basically the same position that the Kremlin has had effectively from the start of the war. So difficult times ahead for these negotiations at all.
Thank you so much. That was Oz Chatterjee reporting live from Kyiv. Meanwhile, North Korean officials have admitted to deploying troops to Ukraine to fight for Russia. At the same time, over 1,500 foreign mercenaries were confirmed to be fighting for Moscow. So we're staying on the topic of Ukraine, but we are now going live to our second correspondent in Ukraine, Don Arlith, who has more on this latest development. Hello, Don. So now that the cat is out of the bag, as North Korea admitted to deploying the troops, how do you think Ukraine is going to use this to leverage its position with the U.S. in negotiations?
Well, if we if we listen to the past statements of U.S. President Donald Trump, he has a fantastic relationship both with the Russian president and the dictator there in North Korea. How this will be leveraged is yet to be seen. But just to kind of straighten things out a little bit, the North Koreans, now this cat is out of the bag, everybody was assuming that the North Koreans were there fighting in Russia's Kursk region. They're not fighting on Ukrainian territory, so far as we know. However, the Russian state-owned TASS news agency today released the first videos, and of course, both Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un have essentially thanked each other, and this really stems out of the announcement that Valery Gerasimov, the Supreme Commander of the Russian Armed Forces, saying that Ukrainians have been completely kicked out of Russia's Kursk region. Of course, we all recall the Ukrainians have been in that region and occupying small parts of it since August of last year. Of course, Ukraine has fired back, saying that is simply not true. There are still troops not only in the Kursk region, but also in Belgorod. So, you know, the Russians, the North Koreans have been taking advantage of this situation, trying to use it as propaganda, that the two countries have such an alliance, and they're now admitting to the fact that the North Korean troops are actually fighting alongside Russian forces there in Russia.
So we spoke about this announcement by the North Korean officials, but now let's jump into the next subject, the over 1,500 mercenaries, foreign mercenaries from across the world. What more do we know about them, and where are they from, and why they joined the fight, actually?
Well, from during the last year, from April of 23 to May of 2024, this was a time that Russia said it didn't need any foreign fighters. There were always accusations that these mercenaries were there, and of course they came out with this number due to a hack of the Unified Medical Information and Analytical System in Moscow. They determined that 1,500 mercenaries were recruited by Russia. They come from about 50 countries. Just to give you an idea here, most were actually from Nepal, 603. 64 from Sri Lanka, 50 from China, 43 from India, and then of course various countries in the Middle East and in Africa as well. So this just goes to show that if you put the two stories we just talked about, the North Koreans plus these mercenaries together, that Moscow has a little bit of problems with manpower that it's been unable to admit to, and this is a clear sign that Moscow is simply not up to the game and can't even really control its own territory even, let alone trying to occupy more territory here in Ukraine.
Thank you so much. That was Don Arlith reporting live from Odessa. Albania and Montenegro will officially join the Three Seas initiative as associated members. This is one of the biggest takeaways of the first day of the Three Seas Business Forum, bringing together business leaders and policymakers from 13 nations from the Adriatic to the Baltic. The event is meant to tackle the region's biggest challenges, from energy and infrastructure to digital innovation. Former Croatian President Kolinda Grabar-Kitarovic, a founding voice of the initiative, called Central and Eastern Europe a place where resilience is built. Sasha Farbach was on site and has this report.
The Three Seas, it has included 13 member states up until now, but it seems to be growing to 2 more.
I'm delighted that the Three Seas community is continuously expanding its ranks, welcoming into them further countries that wish to establish a closer cooperation in a region. During the summit, which starts tomorrow, Montenegro and Albania will officially join the Three Seas initiative as associated participating states, and Turkey and Spain will join us as the strategic partners. Also, thanks to the new members, the cooperation within this format will become more meaningful and more fruitful, and the summit in Poland will contribute to strengthening the ties between all member countries and partners of the initiative.
Now, the Central Eastern European region, also known as the Three Seas region, stretching from the Baltics down to the Adriatic and the Black Sea. 13 countries. Now, the Business Forum, that's what was marked here today, that first day of a two-day summit here that saw the likes of the Three Seas founder, one of the founders, the former president of Croatia, giving that a very positive and open speech about the resilience of this region, how much has already been achieved. Now, looking at all this is about energy, this is about infrastructure. One statistic here touted by the expert is that every euro invested into infrastructure has a potential of 4 times the return. So infrastructure is key, but also about that transatlantic relationship. Had here, for instance, former ambassador for the United States, Ms. Mosbacher, speaking here as well, and also former generals of the United States and the U.S. Secretary of Energy here, Mr. Wright, also speaking on this important day, also for Poland. Nevertheless, it was about moving this whole region forward. Now, although there are some criticisms around, speaking to policymakers from Romania as well as from the Baltic state of Lithuania, the mood was positive.
Romania has contributed about 20 million euros to the Three Seas Initiative Fund. And I believe that investments so far vastly exceed that, about 10 times. Much of that is in energy. And through the fund, there have been solar projects that have been financed. I recently visited one of them that's already done somewhere in the western part of the country. And it actually benefited from RRF funding as well. So I think that's a good example of blending.
I shall remind you proudly that in Vilnius a year ago, we were very happy to admit Japan as the 4th strategic partner of the Three Seas Initiative. This is a great development, and this year at the Business Forum here, maybe tomorrow, we'll hear some announcements, hopefully, from some Japanese institutions, special announcements on the Three Seas Initiative.
Now, this region also focusing not just only on infrastructure and energy, but now looking at adding new tiers, new focuses for the next term, for the next 10 years potentially. And that would be security, defense, and space. And that was also mirrored here, talking about dual-use application, how this is now even more integrated into different initiatives, how it is valuable for the European Union, that's what the organizers said, just as it is valuable for the region as a whole. But it's one not about stagnation, but of optimism in a very precarious part of the world. That's Sasha Farbach at the Three Seas Business Forum in Warsaw for TVP World.
Today, the Polish government signed the so-called Engineering Development Agreement for the country's first nuclear power plant with U.S. consortium Westinghouse Bechtel. The deal took place during U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright's visit to Warsaw to meet with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. Before we get into the significance of today's events, let's set the scene with Jan Kennedy's feature report.
These signatures mark a major milestone in the development of Poland's first nuclear power plant. On Monday, the company behind the project, called Polish Nuclear Power Plants, signed an agreement with the U.S. nuclear consortium Westinghouse Bechtel. And according to Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, the newly updated document brings much-needed security to the €50 billion project.
The Polish side worked to ensure the agreement better serves our interests as well as those of our partners. Thanks to changes introduced in 16 key areas, this project is now more secure, and the guarantees provided offer a greater sense of safety for everyone involved.
While not yet the final contract, today's signing of the so-called Engineering Development Agreement is seen as a vital bridge ahead of the upcoming major milestones.
We finally have a bridging agreement that is bridging the gap between the design of nuclear reactors in Poland and the final construction agreement. We are ready to discuss further steps when it comes to the agreement on financing scheme with European Commission and the final contract with the Americans.
Although the full details of the deal remain confidential, experts say the updates are designed to flesh out responsibilities of both sides, something that hasn't been clearly defined in the previous contract signed by the former government.
I believe it's the start of a long-term nuclear cooperation between the United States and Poland that will be involved in building future reactors, both here in Poland and in other nations across Europe.
US Energy Secretary Chris Wright says the deal could spark a wave of nuclear projects, not just in Poland, but across the entire CEE region.
There should be some changes when it comes to the composition of deal, the distribution of responsibility between the parties, and the rules of dealing with any obstacles like delays and other issues with the contract.
Westinghouse has already signed an agreement to deliver 2 reactors to Bulgaria's Kozloduy power plant and has opened talks with Ukraine, which is eager to reduce its reliance on Russian nuclear technology. The company is also a strong contender for the yet unannounced second nuclear power plant in Poland, for which the government wants more competition. Major players from France and South Korea are expected to present their offers, among others.
If there are other offers, bring them. Look, President Trump is someone who is a deal maker, and if there are other offers that can support this effort, then we should do it.
Currently, the government in Warsaw is waiting for the European Commission's approval of state aid for the project. After this hurdle is cleared, the construction may start in earnest.
Monday saw another debate of the Polish presidential hopefuls. As candidates intensify their campaign efforts, outgoing Polish President Andrzej Duda announced his endorsement of law and justice-backed Karol Nawrocki, a conservative historian and former president of the Polish Institute of National Remembrance. Could this potentially shift the balance during the upcoming elections? Our chief political correspondent, Aaron Daman, has this next report.
In Poland, a presidential race with much at stake. That was an election debate on Monday night, featuring all 13 registered candidates. But just 2 of them are in with a realistic shot at the top job: centrist Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski and right-wing historian Karol Nawrocki.
We will win if we all speak with one voice on the most important issues, when we remember that the enemy is in the east, and in the west of Poland there is prosperity, and there are our friends. We can't listen to Ursula von der Leyen and her ideas about security in Poland. I want a Poland strong in those alliances which are most important for us.
The pair don't just oppose each other when it comes to Europe, with Nawrocki also championing Trump's rebellion against the old world order and trying to portray Trzaskowski as part of the liberal left. On the other hand, Trzaskowski is underlining Nawrocki's political inexperience while campaigning for deeper links with the EU and NATO and in support of women's rights and abortion access. That appeared to be working in the polls as Nawrocki long struggled to make inroads. But in recent days, a potential changing of the winds.
Nawrocki numbers are rising, and we see that he's matching the numbers of the party. The question is whether he can go beyond the party numbers in the first round, and if he can mobilize more people to vote for him.
Nawrocki is supported by the opposition Law and Justice Party, the same backing previously received by current President Andrzej Duda, who cannot run again. Despite that, Duda has refused to put his name behind the candidate until now.
I will vote for Karol Nawrocki because I believe that this is a man who will strive and who will do everything to make Poland an honest country.
President Duda has been in a paralysing cohabitation with Prime Minister Donald Tusk, using the negative power of the presidency to stall the coalition government's proposed agenda and reforms, a pattern that would likely continue under Nawrocki. So how will Duda's advocacy play with the Polish people?
The party itself and president are committed to pull this candidate who has been performing very poorly now by his ears to get him to the second round as close as he can be to Mr. Trzaskowski.
Voters go to the polls on May 18, and if no candidate gets more than 50%, the top two will head to a final face-off on June the 1st. Aaron Darman, TVP World.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has declared a 3-day ceasefire in the war with Ukraine next month to mark the 80th anniversary of the victory and the end of the Second World War in Europe. However, with constant attacks and Russia repeatedly contradicting its own words, the likelihood of that is very much debated. Is this announcement another one of Russia's games? Is Moscow going to successfully impose the recognition of Crimea and other oblasts as Russian territory in the ceasefire deal? Is the U.S. going to convince Zelensky to cede Crimea? Ivana Stradner, research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, joins me now to discuss these mounting questions around the ceasefire. Ivana, thank you so much for joining. It's great to have you on the program again.
Always great to talk to you and your team.
Pleasure. So Putin declared a ceasefire 72 hours during Victory Day. So what are the chances that this will actually take effect, especially now that Russia has broken its promises so many times before?
If the history is any indicator, I'm not going to be positive about that. And as a matter of fact, Russia already violated ceasefire in the past and then blamed Ukraine. That's number one thing. The second thing that I want to emphasize is if Russia is serious about ceasefire, why then we have to wait almost 10 days? Why Russia doesn't commit today to pursue such effort? And the third thing that I want to emphasize regarding so-called Victory Day that Russia is celebrating as part of its propaganda machine, it is just part that they are going to use such a day to rally their allies, and then again to blame Ukraine and to likely, just like previous years, to link that to fighting Nazi. So it's actually in Russia's also interest to pursue such a ceasefire. But as I mentioned, that could be part of Putin's game to actually violate and then to blame Ukraine, because it's exactly what Moscow has been doing for a very long time.
So in your points that you mentioned, you posed a very interesting question. The second question you had about why not now, why later. We've heard from Andriy Sybiha. He said that if Putin wanted ceasefire, he could have it today, and it should last for at least 30 days. So we're not looking at 72 hours, we're looking at 30 days. So why do you think that Russia took this step, and what does it signal?
So to begin with, I'm actually not so sure that Putin wants a long-lasting ceasefire, because the war still benefits him. There is one thing that he needs, which is a break and a pause to reposition his military, to rebuild, and then to continue with his war. Because we have to understand how Moscow thinks about war in Ukraine. And Putin is very blunt about his ambition when it comes to Ukraine, which is to subjugate Ukraine. So make no mistake, Putin is not interested in a long-lasting peace. All he really needs to want actually is to reposition his military and to continue with his attack. And the second point that I also want to make, which is that this war in Ukraine, it is not only about Ukraine. We already see a lot of sabotage activities across Western and Central and the rest of Eastern Europe. So Russia doesn't really need to roll on tanks and jets in any of those countries, and Putin is not going to stop at Ukraine. So we really have to understand that strategic deception is a cornerstone how Putin actually thinks about a war. He's a KGB guy, he's not a military guy, and he's not interested in peace anytime soon, because his ultimate goal is to restore what he likes to call Russian greatness and to continue with his imperialistic ambition.
So do you think that the Victory Day is actually going to be some sort of a pivotal moment after which we're going to see an escalation when it comes to military activity of Russia on the Ukrainian territory?
I do not have any crystal ball to claim what Putin is going to do. But regardless, whether it's going to last 72 hours or whether it's going to last several weeks, it doesn't matter. Because as I mentioned, Putin is in his position right now to negotiate, to try to convince the Trump administration that he wants a peace. In the meantime, he is going to continue arming the Russian military, to reposition it, and to continue with his attacks. So we should absolutely not fall for those tricks, and also to pay attention to whether there will be another attempt of so-called, as Putin calls it, like ceasefire, but then to blame Ukraine and to put a ball in Kiev's court and to launch a full propaganda campaign claiming that it's actually Ukraine that violated such ceasefire. So we should not fall for those tricks.
U.S. President Donald Trump said that he believed that Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky is ready to seize Crimea in order to reach ceasefire. Do you think that Mr. Zelensky would actually make that concession, considering the price that would have to be paid for a ceasefire?
I think there are a lot of words, and we have to distinguish between words and facts/actions. So I haven't heard President Zelensky talking about that, but I saw in American media where allegedly Ukraine might be willing to give up on part of its territory. I think it's important not to panic right now and to pause for a moment and to wait for further actions, because this could be also part of their negotiation tactic. However, even if some policymakers in Washington and elsewhere in the West think that they can also easily outsmart Putin by giving him what he wants to hear and what he wants to get in the short run. Actually, if you read the Russian newspaper, they have propaganda for the West. They claim, how negotiations are going great, but actually they do not also trust Washington, and they believe that also Washington is playing its own game, especially now when Trump has changed rhetorics towards Russia.
Well, unsurprisingly, Russia sets the scene by spreading Russian propaganda not only in their own media. In his interview with the Brazilian newspaper O Globo, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said apart from Crimea, they would like to see other oblasts that they're currently occupying actually enter the Russian territory as part of the ceasefire, including Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. Do you think that it would be at any point possible for Russia to actually step back on that demand? Is there a sort of a margin, or they're set in stone when it comes to wanting those oblasts?
So there are numerous, people who have been written about the history of negotiation with Russia. And basically the deal is you give Russia one thing, but then they want 4 more. So that's the part of their negotiation tactic, which is absolutely not in good faith. So they're just changing their bargaining strategy, which means asking for more and more, so Ukraine eventually, gives up, and also so the U.S. also gives up. So that's, part of their bargaining strategy. What they really want is one thing. The second thing is what they will be able to achieve in the long run, and I doubt that Ukraine will easily cede its own territory.
Ivana, it's always great to have you on the show to join me to talk about all things Russia and the ceasefire. Thank you so much. Ivana Stradner, Research Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, was my guest.
Always a pleasure.
And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight, but please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment with more news, features, and interviews, and we'll see you there.